Bubble week. 1 week of torment left.
Welcome to Championship Week on the D3 Datacast. It's an exciting time of year, but first with a special announcement, we promised that we would do a special live stream edition of the show once we hit the 200 subscriber mark here on YouTube, which we did last week. Matt, congratulations. Thanks for all your hard work, buddy. Good job, team.
Good job, team.
So we tweeted that and we promised we'd be back with details, and we have details to share finally. So this Tuesday, February 21st, at 9 p.m., we will be here live. We're going to use this time just as a hangout. You can join us, bring your questions. It's our intention to interact with you if you have questions about where your team stacks up or how the bubble's taking shape, Pool C chances,
Bracketing
anything.
Where your team might go, where your team might host.
Right, or anything, just like a live mailbag. And there'll probably be some games going on. We can kind of keep an eye on that too. So looking forward to that time. Please join us, pop in, pop out. But we'll do that Tuesday night, February 21st, 9 p.m. You can we'll tweet about it so you can get the link. It'll be there on our YouTube page. You know where to find us. You found this video, you know where to find us. So thank you to all who have clicked the subscribe button on YouTube here. If you haven't yet, we would appreciate if you do. If you like what we've been doing, that really helps us out. And give us a thumbs up on this episode if you're enjoying the content. All right, so Matt,
we don't know how to live stream, so we got to figure that out. So you'll figure it out with us.
Right. Exactly. All right, so Matt, let's get right into what everyone came here for this episode to see, and that's your top 25 ballot for the week.
Yeah, no one cares about the bubble. No one cares about regional rankings. No one cares about who's in or who's out. They just really want to know, who did Matt have 24 versus 25 on his ballot. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. When this episode comes out, the top 25 rankings will either be just fresh out or just about to come out. But here's how I voted this week. Honestly, not a ton of changes from last week. Still hanging out there with Randolph-Macon at the top. At the end of my ballot, NYU and Catholic came in. Also Tufts. Zach, you've been telling me about Tufts all year. I ranked them in at number 23. They got a nice NESCAC tournament win this week. They've been coming on strong, I think. A few things jumped around in the middle. Case Western Reserve up to the top half of my ballot and at number 12. They've looked certainly very impressive here lately in UAA play. They just clinched that championship title. So good things from Case Western Reserve there. Also into the top 10 is UW Oshkosh. I think they were just on the outside last week, and they've been continuing to win. So they've entered my top 10. And that's how things stand for me.
Yeah, glad to see you got Tufts back in there, because every time they've had a big win, you get a message from me. Told you about Tufts. Yep. I told you.
They were a team I had ranked earlier in the season, then they fell out for a big chunk of the middle, and now I think they've been playing well, and I brought them back in.
I don't think you ever heard from me when Tufts lost, though.
No, you did not.
All right, great, Matt. Looks perfect. Let's get into the meat and potatoes here, because we finally have some real meat to go with our potatoes. Case Western Reserve, with a week here to spare, has clinched the first bid to the tournament. They have won the UAA. Technically, they could tie, but they own the tiebreaker over Wash U. So congratulations to the Spartans. They are our first official entrant into the field here.
63 more teams to go. We have one down. Feels good. The next, 6 days will determine the last 63 spots. But congrats to Case. They're the first ones in. It's an accomplishment to win the UAA. It's also an accomplishment with a game to go. You've already wrapped it up. So very nice for them. They've been playing very strong recently, and very fitting to win that crown with a game versus it was Wash U, right? Head to head, they played, they won, and they clinched it.
All right, that leaves 63 to go. So there's some teams feeling pretty good, but not quite as good as Case, because Case has their spot.
Yep. So we know there's going to be 44 Pool A's, and then there's going to be 20 Pool C's. Those at-large bids, those Pool C bids, are what we spend a ton of time on. So here, looking at kind of the bubble order, I took a look at the work that D3 Bubble does, Drew Pasteur, and also some of the work that Bob Quillman does. He posts on Twitter, daily now, what his top kind of seeds look like and what his Pool C picture looks like. I kind of scrunched all those two. Both those people's work together to kind of come up with some of these lists. These are kind of directional orders based on both of their methods. But here's 20 teams that feel pretty good. These are all teams that are likely in, right? We have 20 Pool C bids. So if all 20 of these needed the Pool C, then I think these would be the teams. A bunch of these teams are projected as conference leaders to probably win their Pool A. So this is a minimum of probably 7 Pool C teams, but it could be more as we get upsets in the tournament. Maybe Randolph-Macon finally goes down in the ODAC and they need the Pool C. So we might see some of these teams end up on Pool C. A lot of them will be Pool A, but these are all teams in this last week, this championship week. They're all feeling pretty good because really, no matter what happens, I think they're going to be riding fine to hear their name called on Selection Monday. So I'm just going to read through the names. People like to hear their names called. Feeling Safe, Randolph-Macon, St. Joseph, Connecticut, Christopher Newport, Swarthmore, Mount Union, Middlebury, Williams, Rowan, John Carroll, Stockton, Wheaton, UW Oshkosh, St. Thomas, Hampton-Sydney, Johns Hopkins, Mary Hardin, Baylor, Keene State, Oswego State, Wash U, and Tufts. You've been telling me about Tufts, Zach. I think they're probably also safe. You can see 2 of those teams, Middlebury and Wash U, are in yellow. They do not have their Pool A available to them, so they're definitely sitting on Pool C. Wash U, we know it can't finish first in the UAA, and Middlebury has already lost in the NESCAC tournament, so they're sitting there waiting for their names to be called on Selection Monday.
Yeah, so as we were trying to figure out how to put this episode together, we have Case is the only one who has officially converted their status to Pool A, right? So everyone is Pool C until you're Pool A. And so that's why we came up with the 20 here. So 20 representing one for each of the Pool Cs. And as you mentioned, as we go through conference tournaments here, a few of these will convert themselves into Pool A bids, and some people will lose, and they'll need the Pool C. But if you're on this list, you should feel pretty good about it.
So then after we got the top 20, these are the first teams that would have first crack at Pool C probably. Then we're going to go pick 10 more teams. That's kind of how I broke it down. These are 10 teams that are probably safe. I saw a delineation line kind of after WPI, roughly speaking, taking this large groups of teams. I think have to be a lot of craziness around the country for someone on this team or on this list, one of these teams not to be in. Now they have different levels of safeness probably. But Pomona Pitzer, Montclair State, North Park, Mary Washington, Claremont Mudd Scripps, NYU, Utica, Worcester, UW La Crosse, and WPI, they all look pretty good to me. They all look pretty safe right now. I think of these teams, if NYU loses their last game of UAA play, then they fall down to 680. You could have a conversation about that being dicey, maybe. Claremont Mudd Scripps of teams that I have here in this kind of feeling pretty good line, their 507 strength of schedule could make things interesting. So if they lost a SCIAC semifinal, maybe they slip further down the list and maybe they're in a more bubbly position. So those are kind of 2 teams I looked at this grouping that maybe, don't feel very good. Any team that doesn't win their Pool A has got some level of sweat on their brow. Maybe those 2 teams have a little bit, but I think if things kind of go relatively according to plan, these teams should be fine if they have to have their Pool Cs.
And then going back to the previous slide, as some of those convert their status into Pool A's to join the list with Case Western Reserve, it'd be teams from this list that replace those on the 20 feeling good, right? As
Yeah.
those teams ahead of them win their Pool A, don't need the Pool C. You could slide one of these teams up to take their place as they move out to join Case Western Reserve.
Yep. And if we see teams on this slide that win the Pool A, that's not a bid thief if the teams were on the previous slide, right? We see 2
Right.
here, Pomona Pitzer, Claremont Mudd Scripps. Either one of those wins the Pool A. We didn't have a bid thief out of that conference. North Park out of the CCIW, if they beat Wheaton, falls on Pool C. That's not really a bid thief. We kind of expected both those 2 teams, UW La Crosse and UW Oshkosh, again, the same thing. So there are teams here that could still win their Pool A, and we're not really talking about losing a Pool C slot yet necessarily. If a team like WPI doesn't win the NUMAC, then we're probably talking about a bid thief scenario there where we didn't really have any other NUMAC team in position to grab a Pool C. So that would mean 2 likely bids from that conference.
Yep. And NYU being the UAA on this list is a little bit different position because they have no access or to the Pool A because there's no tournament there. Case Western has already won the Pool A out of the UAA. But since they don't have a conference tournament, they could also end the year with a win as opposed to taking a loss in a conference tournament. So that that winning percentage number is not necessarily locked. Go up, could go down depending on their one remaining game.
Yep, that's always the unique thing about the UAA is everyone else has to get onto Pool C by losing their final game. They can still win, even though we know that they're in Pool C. So, yep, they could improve their resume where other teams usually to fall in Pool C, we're talking about a resume that's a little bit lower than what we see on the screen. All right, after that, I think we get more onto the true bubble. I think we'd have to have some wackiness for teams ahead to be completely off. We still have a week of games left, so the picture will change. Maybe a team or two on the last slide will fall down and be more bubbly, like we mentioned. But I think this is where the true bubble is probably gonna lie. If we had no upsets across the country, this would be 7 more spots available for Pool C. Usually, there's 3, 4. There could be more than that. So this is probably 3 to 7 additional spots for teams on this list. I think this list is roughly grouped in kind of Pool C order as seen by the combination of Drew and Bob, like we talked about, but it's not a perfect order. I just ended up having to type some teams' names in a little bit. Also, a team that wasn't on really either of their lists that I still had to type in was Calvin because I'm not ready to say 0% on that. Um, Especially if we have Texas Dallas on some of the lists and even Claremont Mud Scripts that we saw on the previous screen. Like to me, the Calvin resume is not completely different than that in a lot of ways. Um, it's not the same, otherwise they'd be on the list above, but it's in range. So I had them on the list as well. But here's 15 teams. I think these are really, really where the bubbleness is going to happen. Rochester out of the UAA, if they lose another game, then they're at a 640 winning percentage, and the committee is going to have to decide: can we take a team with a 640 winning percentage, even though they have, probably like the best number of regionally ranked wins and one of the best strength of schedules? They're going to have to make that decision. I could see them going either way on that. I think it's okay to say, yes, Rochester, you're in. I think it's okay to say, sorry, 640 is too low. That's a decision they're going to have to make. East Texas Baptist out of the ASC, if they can't top Mary Hardin Baylor in that conference, or if Texas Dallas comes through and wins that conference, what's going to happen to East Texas Baptist? Wabash, they're going to have to maybe make a little bit of noise in the NCAC tournament to kind of continue to climb in the list and solidify their position here. Emory is in a lot of the same position as a lot of these UAA schools. Another loss, they're at 640. They don't quite have the other resume as Rochester. Their strength of schedule is a little lower. They don't have the quantity of regionally ranked wins. I think Emory's probably out with a loss in their last game. Wabash make the list for a second time. I don't know why, but they're on here again. So I hope that doesn't mean that there was a team that was supposed to be on the list that is not on this list. Washington and Lee out of the ODAC, I think they've come on strong lately. So I think if they make a little bit of a run in the ODAC, they could find themselves in good bubble position. Guilford, I think they're still in the mix, but their regionally ranked wins are low. Their strength of schedule is not super high. And even though they have an 800 winning percentage, once they stack up to other teams, what people like Bob Quillman have been finding is that it's hard to compare the resumes because they don't have a top-notch regionally ranked win in the mix. They haven't been able to beat a Randolph Macon in their conference. So they're going to be sitting there with maybe more of a mediocre resume. Heidelberg, we've seen them they have a win against a number one, or who was a number one last week. They have beaten Mount Union, so that's a good win. The 720 winning percentage is a little bit low, but we saw them being ranked already even a week ago in Region 7, so I think they're in the mix. Colby and Hamilton are still alive in the NESCAC tournament, and so they have some ability to improve their resume. I think Hamilton's going to be really dicey if they lose that semifinal and knock their winning percentage much below that 680. But I think both of those teams are still in the mix. Redlands out of the SCIAC, their resume is not really great until you start digging into those regionally ranked wins. And they've beaten a number one. They beat St. Thomas, and they beat another team in the middle of that region as well. So I think Redlands has some strong regionally ranked wins to rely on. Cortland out of the SUNYAC has a solid resume across the board. I don't know if it's going to be enough to quite get them on the right side of the bubble or not. Calvin and Texas Dallas, very similar resumes, but only one regionally ranked win. Calvin has that against UW Oshkosh, who's number one in their region. But, these strength of schedules for these two teams are only hovering right around or just above 500. The committee doesn't really like that. So I think, these two teams are probably going to have to rely on their Pool A if they really want to get in. And then there's a team like UW Whitewater who, not real high on the winning percentage, not super high on the strength of schedule, 3 regionally ranked wins. It's kind of a resume that's kind of pretty okay across the board. They could find themselves in the mix, in the conversation at the table at the end. I don't know if they get in or if they're just out, but they might be kind of that Region 9 team who's in and around the table when kind of those last few picks are being made. So I think this list is going to represent most of what our true bubble conversations are about. And I would be surprised, if between this slide before and this slide, if we don't have, um, our final 19, 20 pool C spots kind of wrapped up as someone on these lists.
Yeah, and it looks like a big list here. Just looking at it in total, but a lot of this gets sorted out in the region, right?
Mm-hmm.
With what you started talking about, they're just going through. I mean, look at Region 6 here with Emory, Washington and Lee,
Yeah.
Guilford,
Right.
right? So it's three teams kind of in, clumped in here, but for Pool C consideration, it's only going to be one of them at the table at a time because whoever is behind the other two in that mix isn't going to have their opportunity until, say, Emory comes off the board or Guilford. However it shakes out in the regional rankings, someone's going to be uh, perhaps stuck until one of those other teams comes off the board. So it can be a big list here, but when you break it down, it's only going to be one from each region up for consideration at a time, and that helps bring some clarity. But um, it just shows how important these final
Yeah.
regional rankings are, because
Right.
you first need to come out ahead in your regional ranking, and then you hope that you come out looking good compared to the other teams who are the next top team left in their region.
Yeah. Yeah. Like there's some projection here of does Washington Lee jump either into the rankings or into that eighth spot where all the teams above them get picked and then they're able to get to the table. Does Emory end up behind Guilford in those regional rankings? That would make a huge difference as far as is their resume viable. If Guilford doesn't get in and Emory was behind them, then Emory's never going to get in because they're never going to get to the table. And another team in Region 6, Roanoke, I actually, by some of my math, had them in this grouping, but I think they're 0 for 5 maybe against regionally ranked opponents. And with that combined with the resume they had put together, I just think that's not going to be a selected one. I think that's maybe why Wabash ended up twice, as I took them out and typed the team in and didn't readjust. Um, but yeah, that's a great point. It really is going to come down to how are things stacking up in the regions. Does I think probably not, but does a team like Trine end up getting ranked in either week 3 or the week 4 rankings in Region 7? That changes the numbers for a team like Calvin, um, and that again changes the math all over the place. So these regional rankings week 3 are going to be very important because week 3 and week 4 count as regionally ranked opponents for the final rankings. We get some glimpse of that next week. And then the last one the committees do, again, important to reassess what are these regionally ranked wins? Where are the positions within the regions? What do these resumes look like? And that can make a big difference. We saw last year, I think it was DeSales, um, in those last rankings added maybe 3 or 4 or 5 regionally ranked games to their resume in total, and that really just made a big difference to the final selection when you're really splitting hairs between teams with kind of so resumes or like a really high strength of schedule, or there's a team with an 850 winning percentage, and sometimes looking at those regionally ranked wins, the committees lean on those to say this is the team we want to pick because this is a criteria that stands out in a positive way.
Yeah. So when you're a bubble team, your first order of business is coming out ahead in whatever the bubblish group is in your region. Because if you're
Yeah.
at the lower end of that, chances are you're not going to have that opportunity to be selected for a Pool C, just because you're going to be deeper on that board.
Yep. Yeah, so that's what we're looking for. If you're a fan of a team on this list, you want no upsets from the teams on the previous lists. You want all those pool A's to just go ahead and take care of business. You want this not to be 3 spots. You want this to be closer to 7 spots, and you want us to be able to go deeper down on this list. Now, like I said, I didn't do a lot of time to order this list very much, but it's probably in a general order, in some directional order. So, if you're East Texas Baptist, and there's only 1 or 2 bid thieves, you're probably feeling pretty good about your chance to get in. If you're Redlands, you want absolutely no bid thieves. You want to get to the table and you want to have as many opportunities to compare yourselves against these other teams to try to get into maybe like that 19th, 20th spot. If we're talking about the bubble being up 5 spots higher at 15 Pool C teams because there's 5 bid thieves lower on the list that aren't even on the bubble, then many of the teams on this list are probably just never going to either get to the table, or they're going to get to the table just in time for the other team to be taken, and that to be it.
There we go. So the true test will be, will all the pool C's end up being from the list, either this list or the one before,
Yep.
or the previous ones, because the numbers can always change. Maybe there's a surprise out there, but it would
Yeah.
seem that this is kind of where things are. I mean, I know there's some discussion about some other fringe cases I've seen on Twitter that maybe haven't been noted here, but it just seems like everything would have to line up perfectly for those to happen.
Yeah.
This should encapsulate most of the realistic scenarios.
Yep. And by Friday, Saturday, or going into Friday and Saturday, we'll have another look at who's probably made, the semifinals and finals in all of these conferences, and maybe there is a surprise team that was just off the regional list, and now they're getting to a championship game. Their strength of schedule is kind of increasing because they've been playing all these other good teams, and maybe someone does play their way under the bubble that we haven't quite seen yet. So it is still possible for teams to work their way in. Don't lose just because you're on this list. You want to keep winning. That's my advice to players and coaches out there. You want to keep winning, and go ahead and win your Pool A while you're at it. But I think the bubble is firming up as we look at it.
Yep. But like you said, the numbers are always changing every time there's games played. So join us Tuesday night. We can talk about it more then. Bring your specific questions, and
You just cut out there, but yeah, bring your specific questions and we'll enjoy it. All right, we're moving on. Here's the Week 15 picks review. Just quickly going through the list. Muhlenberg, the computer had them as 2-point underdogs at Ursinus. I had picked Muhlenberg, and that was correct. In the ARC, there was Loris at Dubuque. I had picked Loris to cover the 5.5, and they did. Yeshiva was at Farmingdale State. Unfortunately, that game did not get played, so we are just going to consider that a push. Wheaton, Illinois was -1 at Elmhurst. Zach, you and I had both picked Wheaton, and they covered the 1 point. Case Western Reserve was 3.5-point underdogs at Wash U. We already talked about Case taking care of business there. Zach, you had gotten that point. I missed it, so that's one for you. Looking at the conclusion of the regular season, you finished 2-2, and we're 34-35 overall. I was 3-1 and finished 37-32 overall. We're going to keep this rolling into the conference tournaments this week. So here's our slate. Championship week picks. First game there is from the NJAC tournament, Montclair State. The computer has them as 1.5-point underdogs at Stockton. Zach, go ahead and make your pick.
yeah, well, we've talked about Rowan and Stockton kind of being pairs as we were talking about top 16 and things like that, because the resumes are so similar. The advantage that Rowan has is that they beat Stockton twice. But if you look at just the straight numbers, in a lot of ways, the Stockton resume looks a little bit better on the face. So I like Stockton overall, and I think the 1.5 is more than fair. I will lay those points and go with Stockton.
All right, you're taking Stockton. I'm going to be right there with you for similar reasons. I think 1.5 points. The home team for Stockton, I like them in this matchup. I think that number is going to be too close. I like them by more like 3 to 4 points in this game. Our next pick is Hood at Widener. The computer likes Widener by 1 point at home. Zach, who do you like?
Yeah, I like Widener for similar reasons here. 1 point at home. That seems like an easy pick for me.
Yep. I think this will be a very good game, but I'm also going to go with the home team here and you. I think when you're at a home team and you're less than 2 or 3 points, then you really got to start looking at that home team there, and that's what I'm going to go with here and pick Widener as well. Midwest Conference Tournament, Ripon, big number, 12-point underdogs at Illinois College. The computer really likes Illinois College here at home, but Zach, who do you like?
Well, I like Illinois College overall. I think they're really in prove it mode. I think they feel a little disrespected based on just being one of those high winning percentage, low SOS teams. But the 12 is a big number for me. So I will go with Ripon.
Yeah, I think often when you see those high winning percentage, low strength of schedules, they're the teams that the computer rankings don't like very much. But I think my computer likes Illinois College a fair bit, and that's why you see the big number here, plus 12. I'm gonna roll the dice with the big number at the home team. I'm gonna go Illinois College. I think they're looking to make that statement. I think they're gonna win. They're gonna win big. I was going to say they're going to try to win big. I think that's what every team tries to do all the time. But yeah, I think Illinois College is going to come out strong in this tournament. They definitely need that Pool A, so I think they're going to make a statement against Ripon. I'm going to go uh, Illinois College. I'm going to give away the 12 points. Big one with Pool C implications in the UAA. Emory at Rochester to close out the season. The computer likes Rochester at home by 2.5 points. Your call, Zach.
I will take the 2.5 with Emory. I feel like whatever you expect with Emory, take the opposite, and you'll probably be okay. Also, I think it's probably an even betting odds situation to expect this one to go into overtime because it seems like Emory plays a lot of overtime games as well. I will take the 2.5.
Yeah, I think these are two teams that have not trended particularly well in the second half of UAA play, but it feels to me like Rochester's righted the ship a little bit recently. I think both of these teams are playing for a lot in this game, but I think Rochester is the one I think they can. Well, I think both teams are probably in with a win. Rochester might even be out with a loss, but Rochester being at home, well, 2.5 points. I don't think Emory's been, in my mind, playing their best lately. I think Rochester has found ways to win recently, so I'm going to go with Rochester. I think they're going to come out strong, head into the tournament in the right direction, and cover that 2.5 points. Our last game is a NESCAC semifinal, I believe. It's Tufts versus Hamilton. The computer likes Tufts on the road. I think this is a true road game for Tufts.
Neutral court at
Ooh,
Williams.
neutral court at Williams. So the computer likes Tufts on the neutral court by 5 at Hamilton.
Yes, and I will lay the 5 because I've been telling you about Tufts all season long. I took them in my fantasy Pool C draft that we did way back in early December. Look for the Jumbos to lock down that Pool C bid, and or who knows, maybe they'll convert it into Pool A. But give me Tufts.
I'm going to take Tufts as well. I think they win the game. That might knock Hamilton off of the Pool C bubble. Not quite sure there. But I think Tufts wins the game. I was really trying to decide on the 5 points. I came down to I really think Tufts is the better team. If it's the neutral court, as you claim it is, Zach, then I think I feel even better about the 5 points that I picked here. So Tufts by more than 5, I'm okay with it.
Plus, I've been telling you about Tufts all year.
You've been telling me about Tufts. So that's our picks. Hope you're still playing along at home. We'd love to see your picks. Either post them to us via tweet or in the comment section below. But I know we've heard from people that they love the pick section, so hope you're enjoying it too. And I think that takes us to the mailbag.
To our favorite segment, the mailbag. You ready?
I'm ready. You got the first one?
First one comes from Max Fan at Go Maccabees on Twitter. Curious to hear people's thoughts. If you had complete authority to make any and all changes you wanted to the entire Pool C and regional ranking system, you would blank. And so this was a general tweet, but it was followed up that this was something for us to address in the mailbag. So here we are. You want to go first, Matt?
Yeah. I don't have a great answer as far as like a completely overhauled system. I think a couple of things that we really need to see based on the current system, which I think is largely okay. I think the system is largely okay. I would like to see either more regionally ranked teams, similar to last year when it was too many teams. I think that proved there was some positives and negatives in that. I think the committee was correct. They spent a whole lot of time figuring out who was 9 versus 10 in a region when they knew full well neither of these teams were going to make the Pool C table or be selected, but they had to get it right. So they had to spend a ton of time there. But I think the advantage of that is all of the teams that were relevant were inside of those regional rankings. And the committee could use results versus regionally ranked opponents to assess games against all of those teams, to dive in. And it wasn't just like what we see this year, where a team like Rowan or Stockton has a bunch of regionally ranked games from playing in the NJAC, and some other teams don't have as many because they're the only team in their conference that was ranked, and there's a couple other good teams that are maybe eighth or ninth or just outside. We can't consider those rankings and decide which of these sets of games were better. We just kind of have to go with, well, there's a whole bunch over here. There's not very many. So that's one thing to do, is go back. I think, though, my preference would be to change that results versus regionally ranked opponents number to something like a results versus RPI top 50. I don't know if RPI is the exact right thing, but some sort of calculated formula that is more national than regional. So it doesn't really matter of if your region is small or big. It's just looking at numbers across the country and calculating some sort of a number and saying against the top 50 in this number, who have you beaten? So there might be a bunch of teams in your region. It might be there's only a couple of teams in your region because your region is not very strong. But I think that would help nationalize the criteria. So when we're doing Pool C selections, that we would have some way to compare the resumes across the country. It's not perfect because teams across the country don't play the same schedules. We'd still see what we think is teams kind of more towards the Atlantic coast side of things getting or having the ability to have inflated strength of schedules due to the kind of more disparate ratings between one kind of good conference in an area with a bunch of maybe mediocre conferences in an area. But I think it would do more towards eliminating the regionality and going toward more of a piece of national criteria among the other criteria. So that's kind of maybe one answer from me. I don't know if you have other opinions, Zach.
No, I agree. I think instead of doing a top 50, though, I would make it a top 100 because that increases the odds that those 100 would be sprinkled, maybe not more evenly, but when you expand it to 100, it's more likely that teams will have access to other teams within that 100 as opposed to making it more
Yeah.
limited. Um, and then I think, yeah, because I think it is an important part of the criteria or part of a team's resume to give credit to them for good wins, which I believe or I interpret the results versus regionally ranked opponents criteria to be what they use to evaluate how many good wins a team has. So yeah, I think that would work a lot better to make it like a top 100, a national top 100, because like you said, the current system doesn't give any credit for playing a game against Trine, who is on the outside in a deep region 7, whereas it's giving credit for a game against Marion, who was was in the last spot in their region because they had to fill one more spot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, So I think that really um, penalizes some teams. Other teams benefit from that kind of system. So let's just make it a top 100, and whatever you play, and then they could still look inside of that to say, okay, they've got a 3-4 record against the top 100. Well, who are those against? Oh, well, it was against a team ranked 5, 15, and 74. So I think that the committee can use it much the same way, but I think it is uh, a better way to accomplish what I think they're trying to accomplish with the results versus regionally ranked opponents.
Mm-hmm.
I would also, I would add, I think that it would be helpful, again, whether it's RPI or not, something to help contextualize winning percentage and strength of schedule together. Um, Even if it's not taking those two and simplifying it into an exact number, at least uh, if they were willing to do that so that we could have some sort of common understanding of how they may weight, the opposite kind of resumes where you have a high winning percentage, low SOS versus a lower winning percentage, high SOS. I think then we don't have to look at these situations where it looks like they're weighting the SOS a little bit higher than the winning percentage. Like it gives teams kind of two ways to come up with the same resume, right?
Yeah. Right.
Um,
Right.
and then it's just I think that leads to more transparency because if it's something that can be calculated, we can know, okay, well, this kind of resume and this kind of resume, they're wildly different in terms of winning percentage and strength of schedule, but the committee will look at them kind of similarly
Yeah.
in the end. Now that they can still choose to accept one or the other, but at least we know that those are kind of in line.
Right.
Um, so I would like there to be some kind of tool to better contextualize wide gaps in winning percentage and strength of schedule, as well as, like you said, changing the way that they evaluate what is a good win,
Yeah.
um, to make it make more sense.
I
I
think I'm.
think, yeah, I think that the whole system doesn't necessarily need to be overhauled. I think starting within region is well in line with the D3 philosophy. Um, and like we mentioned in our Pool C discussion, it's where you shake up in terms of the bubble, it starts with, how things line up in your region. I think that's important. Um, and given the D3 philosophy, I don't think it's unfair to make a team earn their spot in their region before we consider their national viability, instead of looking at their national viability as a way to stack them up in their region, right? Let's start with region play, and then based on how you stack up there, you earn your spot for national consideration.
Yeah, going back to the idea of like an RPI rating or a net rating or something like that to replace results versus regionally ranked opponents. I think the other benefit we'd get from that is that those calculations wouldn't have to lag a week. We wouldn't always be going off of last week's rankings, so we wouldn't have to do an alphabetical ranking right away. We'd have all the criteria right from the beginning, and we could use that criteria in the moment, and then we wouldn't have to have like a week 3 versus week 4 all count in the final regionally ranked opponents list. So I think that would just go a long way to keeping all of the data current and live, as well as making those demarcation lines with each within a region. There wouldn't be 10 demarcation lines around the country. There'd be maybe one. Are you inside the top 100 or outside the top 100? Rather than 10 different lines that all make a big difference as far as where they are.
Right. I mean, as the numbers change, you could still have 10 teams moving out and in, but I don't think that's as big of a deal. And like we said, you can still look inside of it to say, oh, it was a team. You can still make distinctions between a team ranked 91st
Yep.
and 7th,
Yep.
right? So you can give more credit for a win over a team ranked 7th in that system versus whatever. So,
Yep. So I think the system is largely good. It's a lot better than previous systems, but I would maybe tweak a few of these things um, to help give more national context rather than so much regionality and then trying to apply it nationally. And the committee's put in a bad spot where it doesn't always make sense, but you kind of have to go by the criteria. So you have to, maybe you get forced into weighing results versus regionally ranked opponents too heavily because it's a criteria and it stands out so starkly.
right.
All right, next question. Zach, do you have the next question?
Yes, next one comes from Dan on Twitter. Who looks like a potential bid thief to you? So we're going to punt on the answer to this one a little bit because um, Drew at D3 Bubble on Twitter basically gives a better answer, I think, than we could probably give. So what I did, I clipped his tweet from this morning, which he gives odds for the most likely bid thief. So I think this is all of them that appeared with a greater than 10% chance. So we'll just defer to his list. And there you have Nazareth in the Empire 8, Trinity, Texas in the SCAC, Texas, Dallas in the ASC, WestCon in the Little East, Babson in the New Mac, Alfred, another possible bid thief out of the Empire 8, Wabash in the NCAC, Ohio Wesleyan in the NCAC, Hamilton out of the NESCAC, Redlands in the SCIAC, and Brockport in the SUNYAC. You have
Yeah.
any reactions to any of those in particular, Matt?
No, I think that's a great list. It's a better list than I would have come up with just doing show prep, I think. So major shouts to Drew. If you're not following at D3 Bubble, I'm sure all of you are, but this definitely follow his stuff. The one thing that sticks out to me is Wabash and Redlands. They could be thieving bids from themselves, right? So if they didn't win the Pool A, they were one of those bubble teams we talked about. So maybe
Right.
Wabash loses the championship game, so they're on the bubble and they get the Pool C, but they win one and that takes away a Pool C, but that would have been theirs already. So chances that they're kind of stealing their own bid or a bid that wouldn't have otherwise already gone to someone else. Similar for Redlands, there might be a team that's likely on the table at that last amount of time, but it might not have been their bid. Maybe they would have been just left off and they're stealing it from someone else. So even though they're maybe bubble or bubble slightly in type of teams, they could still be thieving bids from others around the country.
Right. And as you look at this list, it's either teams that appear deeper on the list we discussed earlier or were not on that list. So it's kind of a good check between the systems that, yes, these are the likely bid thieves. These are teams mostly not in the Pool C consideration or conversation, but if they are, they're on the fringes of that right now.
Yep. Yeah, Hamilton in the NESCAC might be similar as well, right? Yep, good
Right.
call. All right, mailbag number 3.
Okay, this one came through a direct message on Twitter from JR. In your opinion, if the 64 best teams were selected for the tournament, how many conference AQs would be left out? Now, I took a stab at this using the regional ranking data, Matt, that you run and post. So I'm going to start with the obvious caveat that there may be a difference between using the current criteria, or at least the way that you distill it down to a single rating, and what truly are the 64 best teams.
by
So this
by NCAA resume.
right,
Yeah.
right. So if I so what I did was I went through your list. So you have a rating system that you use based on winning percentage and strength of schedule, and then I think some bonus points for beating a win over a top two in a region, right?
Yep.
Okay, so what I did was I looked at all those numbers, and just say, okay, we're going to call the 64 best everyone ranked in the top 64. So what conference leaders or who you note as current pool A's fall outside of that top 64 rank? And so those conferences are the NAC in Region 1, NECC in Region 2, Skyline in Region 3, the UEC and the Cognac in Region 4, the AEC and CSAC in Region 5, the PAC and the AMCC in Region 7, the HCAC, NACC, and SLIAC in Region 8. So in case you were wondering why the Region 8 regional rankings are the CCIW and Wash U, that's the reason. So that comes out to 12 Pool A's listed outside of that top 64 ranking based on the current NCAA criteria. Um, so that would be, yeah, so 12. To answer the question, just to add a little more flavor to it. So that would make the last four in North Carolina Wesleyan, Whitman, Texas Dallas, and UW Eau Claire, just to put some names on it. And then teams that are not currently in serious Pool C conversation or very, very fringe Pool C conversation that would be fairly solidly in based on this kind of thing would be teams like Trine, Cortland, Washington and Lee, Roanoke, Maryville, Tennessee.
Yeah. So that last slide we had for the bubble, all those teams are getting in, and then probably a few more after that are getting in, and that's where we kind of stop. So yeah,
Right. Now, Matt, I
interesting.
think did you also look at this and have a different way to
Yeah.
answer the question?
So I looked at this last night. So I used the Massey ratings that were out on Sunday, and I said the 64 best teams are just the Massey top 64 teams, and then what would we be looking at? And I just went through and looked and counted the number of different conferences that were included in the top 64. So we had 25 conferences covered. So I think that would leave 19 Pool C conferences that were not covered. So by the Massey ratings, we would leave 19 kind of teams that would get in, out, and those additional would be at large. I didn't make the full list of what those conferences are or what teams would particularly be affected, but it would be advantageous to a similar number of teams that you just read out as far as Trine. They're in the Massey top 25, I think, um, and a bunch of those other teams. So I think we by the way, Zach found it out 12. The way the Massey ratings had it out 19. I didn't go through my efficiency ratings, but I'm guessing it's similar there. So we would have, something between probably 12 and 19 additional kind of at-large bids to give out to better teams that aren't getting it because we're giving Pool A access around the country. And that kind of makes sense if you follow like Drew's stuff that he posts at D3 Bubble. If you take the strong Pool A's and then where the Pool C cutoff line is, that's usually kind of around that 45-ish spot in the country. So you're kind of I kind of went into it thinking 20. I found 25, but maybe it'd be 20. Like the first 44, 45 are like really strong teams, and then the last 20 are kind of the weaker Pool A's, and so that kind of lines up, I think, kind of ish what we said here.
Yeah, I was looking at his tier list too, where he breaks them down into like how they would be 1, 2s, 3s, and 4s inside pods. And so I think currently you start to see the bottom, or he has the bid thieves kind of start being intertwined with um, with some of the lower conference champions.
Mm-hmm.
So the question becomes, as you expand that Pool C list down the line, where does it intersect or stop with the bottom Pool A's? So it seems like somewhere between 12, which probably does represent the low end, right? Because as we know, there's some
Mm-hmm.
issues, shall we say, in gauging true strength of schedule,
Yeah, sure.
particularly as it skews to the east.
Yep.
So something that is a little bit more robust in terms of actually measuring strength of teams and schedules would make that a little bit larger, probably. So yeah, somewhere between 12 and 20.
Yep.
Cool, great questions. So thanks to all three who submitted for this week's mailbag. Yeah, well, I think, Matt, we will have another regular show next week as we transition from the regular season to the NCAA tournament. So we will expect another mailbag. If you have something you'd like to submit, leave a comment on YouTube here. Find us on Twitter at D3Datacast or on Facebook.com/D3Datacast and let us know what you'd like us to address in the next mailbag.
Yep. But thanks for joining us this time. Thanks for the 200 subscribers. We'll see you at the live stream. Good job, team.